Now at 7, thankfully, we did not get the brunt of a major hurricane this season here in South Florida. But when Irma came ashore in Miami with tropical storm force winds, it still pushed plenty of the ocean with it.
This map created by a group called the Union of Concerned Scientists shows that due to sea level rise, as this century goes on, it will take less and less for the ocean to creep up onto land in South Florida. Eventually, flooding will be a chronic problem.
And when you live at sea level rise is an important topic. That's why we're being joined by two guests, Democratic Congressman Ted Deutch and Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo are joining us this evening.
And they are the co-chairs of the Bipartisan Climate Caucus in Washington, which is aimed at finding climate solutions that lawmakers from both parties can support. And what a novel idea, gentlemen. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle coming together to work on important issues that matter to your constituents and to the country. I want to talk about the two of you working together and bipartisanship in a moment. But first, let's talk about your caucus, the Climate Caucus. Congressman Curbelo, what are you trying to achieve?
Well, the caucus, in my view, has various phases. By the way, thank you for this opportunity and to Ted for the opportunity to have this dialogue on the air. I think our first phase, which we've successfully completed, in my view, is to get Republicans and Democrats together at the table, have a discussion about the facts regarding climate change, and just to share our ideas, take some testimony from experts. We've done that. The next phase, which I think we're in now, is to block bad legislation. There are plenty of our colleagues who like to propose legislation that aren't in the interests of sound climate policy, and we've gotten good at that. We had a major victory on the House floor just a few months ago. And then I think ultimately the goal is to present, introduce, and pass legislation that helps improve the situation, both in terms of mitigation, meaning reducing carbon emissions, and then adaptation, infrastructure, preparing coastal communities, for example, for what may be inevitable.
And when it comes to the Republican Party, there aren't that many of you on board who even want legislation about climate change. A lot of them in the Republican Party aren't even admitting that there is climate change.
Well, I'll tell you what Ted and I have achieved together. When I arrived in the Congress, January of 2015, there were maybe 2 or 3 Republicans in the House who were willing to talk about this issue, acknowledge it, recognize that it's a real challenge. Thanks to the caucus, and without Ted, this would have been impossible. We now have 30 Republicans in the House on the record recognizing that this is a challenge and that they have a role in solving it, that the federal government has a role in addressing it. So we have made incredible progress, but ultimately, and Ted agrees, we need to show some results.
All right, well, let's bring in Congressman Deutch. How optimistic are you that this is going to work out?
Well, I'm really optimistic with the way we've started. As Carlos alluded to, there are 30 Republicans, there are also 30 Democrats. So we took the approach, given that we're both from South Florida and sea level rise is really the driving issue, we should use the Noah's Ark approach as we build this. So if you are a Democrat and you want to join, you have to bring a Republican with you and vice versa. So we're now up to 60 members, 30 and 30, sitting around a table having the kinds of conversations that members of Congress, frankly, should be having about big issues. Look, 16 out of the 17 warmest years in history have taken place this decade. 8 of the 12 warmest months in history took place last year, so for their month. So we know that this is an issue that we have to grapple with. We're satisfied with where we are, but Carlos is right, and I'm proud to be working with him on this. We've taken steps to have a conversation, which is important. We've taken steps to block some bad legislation on the House floor. But when the president pulled us out of the Paris Accords and decided to revoke the Clean Power Plan of the last administration, it requires some greater action on the legislative front by Congress. And my hope is that our Climate Solutions Caucus will lead the way in bringing together Democrats and Republicans.
Well, are you concerned that whatever you achieve legislatively in the House or the Senate is going to be blocked ultimately at the White House level?
Well, I think what we're showing is that there is And there is a real bipartisan commitment to do something about this issue in Congress. What we've been able to achieve thus far shouldn't be surprising to anyone from South Florida. Down in South Florida, the business community, Democrats and Republicans alike, local elected officials, Democrats and Republicans alike, understand that climate change is something that we have to respond to. We have to make investments in infrastructure. We have to take steps to help shore up our communities. Finally, now in Congress, we're seeing the same sorts of discussions with members from South Florida and the coastal states, but also from all throughout the country who understand that climate change poses threats all across the country in the intensity of storms, the intensity of droughts, all issues that matter no matter where you live. So our hope is that as we show that there is this real need to do something, that regardless of the position of the administration, we'll be able to keep pushing forward.
Let's talk about the political climate in Washington, where you gentlemen work so hard for your constituents here in South Florida. It was a remarkable week this week when we saw Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona stand on the floor of the Senate and talk about his upset, frankly, disappointment in the political climate. And he had no hesitation blaming the President of the United States and the way that he's running his administration as a Republican. When you heard Senator Flake say that he's actually going to step down from the Senate, he's retiring, rather than trying to work within sort of the confines, the environment that exists right now, what did you think? Did you agree with anything he had to say?
Look, a lot of members, and on the Republican side mainly, are leaving the Congress because they're frustrated. They don't like the tone of the politics in Washington. They're frustrated with this administration. What
about you?
Well, my record is clear. I mean, I've people ask me, how do you handle Donald Trump? I say very easily, the same way I used to handle President Obama. When I agree with the president, I will work with them, but when I disagree, and everyone knows that I have, oftentimes I'm willing to speak out. And by the way, I think that's what the role of a member of Congress is. Not to put your party first, but to put your district and the country first. Ted did it. He used to disagree with President Obama at times. Iran, other policy issues. I disagree with President Trump on many issues. Now, when we can work together for South Florida, I think we should do so. If we can find common ground, if we can somehow make this administration change course on climate, that would be something to celebrate. So I take my role very seriously as a check and balance on the executive, no matter who's in the White House.
And Congressman Deutch, to you, the Democrats, a lot of them taking glee in the developments that have been happening in the Republican Party, saying that it's completely divided now and these kinds of things. But the Democrats have some divisions within their party as well, as President Trump calls it the Bernie people and the Hillary Clinton people. How would you respond to that?
Well, the one thing that we know for sure is that the president has managed to unify the Democratic Party in ways that I think are fairly dramatic because of what we've seen just in these past few days. It's not just a question that, and I watched the speech that that the senator gave in announcing that he wasn't going to seek re-election. And I was moved by it. It's not just the tone that the president is setting, which is so concerning, though it is to so many Republicans that have now come out on record about the way that he uses Twitter, about the way that he interacts with others and how he goes after those in his own party. But it's also the policies. In South Florida, the fact that the president decided to turn his back on Dreamers, for example, and refused to even consider tackling any sort of comprehensive immigration reform is not just a bad decision, but it's bad for our community, it's bad for our economy, and whether it's that, whether it's the desire to take health care away from tens of millions of Americans and drive up costs on others, these are real policy issues that will spark an important debate. It's hard to sometimes focus on the terrible policies that the administration is putting forward because of the distractions with Twitter and the tone of the debate that he's setting. But both of them, frankly, are concerning for me.
Okay. And I'll just say, despite all of this, we still have some opportunities to get big things done on immigration, for example. I think we really can find a compromise to take care of Dreamers, an issue that's so emotional and important here to South Florida. Ted and I and many others aren't giving up on working together, on having our disagreements for sure, because we will, but also on finding common ground when we can for the benefit of the country.
Congressman Carlo Curbelo, Congressman Ted Deutch. Gentlemen, thank you both so much. Please come back, talk to us about immigration or anything else that you're working on. We'd love to hear it.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.